Wednesday, so probably Friday a week ago, we were at Celestine's place, and Celestine, I was noticing the maze as I went down on the left, and it's like, this is horrible. And I'm thinking, surely we haven't gotten to Celestine's place yet. So got down to the bottom, and there was a really pretty good looking maize crop on, you know, probably a half acre. And I thought, oh, that's Celestine's. Well, when we got down there, we stopped just short of it, and I realized that Celestine, who was one of our farmers, was he didn't have any maize in his field. And I just wondered, like, what went wrong? And so, anyway, as the story came out, Celestine lost all of his crop to millipedes.
Oh.
And Celestine's a pretty sharp guy. He's clearly got some education, and he's a thinker. And so, as we were talking to him, another woman came up who, for some reason, I thought was his wife. So at first, what she was saying didn't make sense to him. It turns out it wasn't. This was just a lady who was coming from her fields. And she kind of interrupted the conversation. But now I know why. I didn't know why initially, but she sort of interrupted the conversation. And we learned that she had planted her sorghum twice now, and none of it's come up.
Oh, no.
And then she said, could you guys help me with my peanuts? And then she asked for help with something else, another crop that she apparently, I guess, is losing. And you could just see it. This lady, yes.
How big are those fields?
You know, they go by hectares over there, so a hectare is 2.5 acres, but I would say most people are farming an area about the size of this part of the church property right here. So commonly 60 to 30 yards wide by about 60 to 80 yards long. And of course, they're doing it all by hand. Some of them have more than that. Celestine certainly had more than that. And so it's all done with a hoe. Anyway, this lady, when she walked up, she was carrying some wood on her head and carrying her hoe on her head, you know, just classic. And her face, I wish I had a picture of her face. She was just a classic looking African woman. She had broad, you know, cheekbones and big eyes, and I would guess that this lady's probably in her 40s, but she looked like she was in her mid-50s. Mm-hmm. And she was trying to control herself, but you could see it. The longer it went on, you could see the concern on her face. Because for this lady, for Celestine, his maize crop was a cash crop. He had food to eat, and his family had food to eat, but this lady was farming for food. And now she hasn't, about 2 weeks of sorghum, and the rains have already started, and if she doesn't get that sorghum in, and she probably doesn't, I don't know that she has the money to plant a third time. So, anyway, you could just see the concern etched on her face. And she hung out with us probably for 20, 30 minutes, and then finally left. Because we were trying to figure it out too. So what was happening is millipedes were coming into the soil, and millipedes love to eat, you know, as soon as a plant germinates and they got those real tender roots, millipedes love that kind of stuff. Plus, everyone is fertilizing with, you know, chicken manure and cow manure and stuff like that, and millipedes love that. So we don't have a millipede problem in the States, except in people's flower beds, interestingly enough, which is where most people, if you put down like a peat moss or you put down manure, stuff like that, that's where you'll have millipedes in your flower beds here, but they've got it now in their whole fields. And what we discovered on that day is that we went to about 4 different farms right in that close area And every one of them were struggling with millipedes. One farmer had already taken all their beans out because they didn't make. And some of their corn had gotten deep enough, and maize is actually a grass. I didn't know that till August. It's actually a grass, and it puts down roots quite deep. And once those roots get on down, millipedes won't touch it. But anyway, serious problem. And so, the reasons were two. For us, if we have millipedes, we're gonna buy pesticide, and we're gonna kill them, right? And you're gonna say, well, I wish you didn't have to buy that, but you got the money to buy it. And you know what to get, and it's available to you. And so Celestine, having lost his whole field, it wasn't because he's not a good farmer. And it's not because he's not working hard. And this lady, it's not because she's not working hard. And, African people know how to survive. That's one of the things that Linda and I, obviously learned. They can survive stuff that would kill you and me in a heartbeat. And we just wouldn't make it. And so they're tough people. And so one of the things that harms them is just a lack of knowledge. And it has nothing to do with intelligence. These people, many of them are really intelligent, but they're not educated. And so education is all about what you got to go to school to learn. Intelligence is just what you were gifted with, And so part of it's a lack of knowledge, and part of it's just financial resources. For example, we talked to one lady who had 3 fields that she rented. She didn't own any of this land, but she rented it. And her 3 fields were maybe a total of about an acre. And she told us how much she had put into them, and she had done a really good job. A really good job. But she had put in a total of about $90 into these 3 fields, in seed and fertilizer and spraying for armyworms. And by the way, armyworms has now become a huge epidemic in sub-Saharan Africa and in Asia. And so she had really grown good maize, had done it just according to the plan that we had laid out. She had done it, but she was now at a point, having put in $90 in inputs, where she really didn't have money to do the next step. And you're thinking, God, like $90, I get it, but at the same time, she just didn't have any money to do more. And she was pretty much up against her limits. And this is such a cool lady. I'm going to tell you more about her later. Very capable, and a little better off than others, I would say, but still poor. And so things changed on this trip from what Ben and I anticipated. We had a certain direction that we were moving, and through maybe an unfortunate series of events, we came to the conclusion that one of the people that we were working with, we wouldn't be working with any longer. When you got right down to it, we didn't like this person anymore. And we're old and don't have a lot of time on the earth, and so I'm just not going to work a whole lot with people I don't like. Because there's plenty of people I do like to work with. So I just said, Ben, I'm done. I'm out on this person and their projects. So, and he was too. And anyway, I won't say more than that, but it shifted the focus. And it turned out to be another one of these surprising events that happened in Rwanda. So we moved from to focus in on where Ben's farm is. And I had sent pictures to Debbie Gillum this morning to put up on the screen, and then she told me, I'm not here. I'm in Midland. And so, anyway, I don't have pictures. I had a picture of Ben's farm, and then I had a picture that I wanted of a group of us, and a lady in particular that I want to talk about at the end. But anyway, we've moved our focus to where Ben's farm is. Ben's farm is in Eastern Province. It's the poorest province in Rwanda. It's, if you know anything about the map, it's on the border with Tanzania and Uganda. And then he's working in Goma district. And And it's the poorest part of Rwanda. Ben went there on purpose. That's where he wanted to go. So when his dad bought the land, or paid for the land, Ben bought it in the poorest district in the country, because he figured if we can make a difference in the poorest district, we can make a difference anywhere else. And so that's what he did. And then our focus shifted from farming to make a profit, like as cash crops, to farming for food. Because in Ngoma district, not everyone, but the vast majority of the people are trying to grow their own food. They're not trying to grow a cash crop. We're interested in helping farmers with a cash crop, just like you and I need cash. Anybody needs cash to improve their lives. But the poorest of the poor, of course, are trying to grow their food. And that's that lady I was telling you about who had concern etched all over her face. So our focus shifted, and it was so interesting. We got back on Wednesday this last week from the farm, and we were running a little bit late, and I had to get all my stuff together to go to the airport. And so, basically the person taking me to the airport felt like we were about an hour late. Turned out we were fine. But they felt like we were an hour late. And Kigali, around traffic, you talk about traffic jams, and you wouldn't believe how the traffic gets, it's just that. It's all that. You're just working your way through. And so these traffic jams around roundabouts are pretty serious. And you sit there for a long time. So I didn't get a chance really to say bye to Ben. So we were in the car, and he calls Delise, who was driving me in her red Cadillac. I went to the airport in her red Cadillac with cream leather interior. So Delise is not one of the poor people in Rwanda, and we keep kidding her. She's about to come back to the States to get her PhD, and we are definitely anticipating, and the scuttlebutt about Delise is after she gets her PhD, she'll be the Minister of Agriculture in the government. And that's really not she probably will be. That's what everybody's talking about her. And she works for Ben, and she's the one who actually manages the farm. So he called Delise, and her first thought was, oh, it's Ben, what'd you forget? It's like, I didn't forget anything. I got all my stuff, one bag. And so Ben called me to say he was so excited. And he said, we didn't get a chance to talk before you left, but he said, I am so positive about what happened this week. And of course, Ben's been working around the world doing this kind of work, for decades now. And he's worked in all the STAN countries, north of Russia, Kazakhstan, all those places. He's worked in those countries. He's worked in several countries in Africa. He's worked in Malawi extensively. And he's been in Rwanda now for 10 years. So he has a lot of experience of this entrepreneurial development in farming. And I don't have any. I'm not a farmer. You guys know that. And so he said, I just feel like we got so much traction this week. And I said, really? Okay. And he's really excited about the shift in direction and so positive about the future. And I said, well, I trust you on that. You've got the experience with it. I don't have it. But he's so excited about it and feeling like we can really make a difference. And he's comparing what's happening in Rwanda with the work he's done everywhere else. And he's done some really significant work around the world. And so I wanted to talk to you some about how that difference came about. And then I've got a biblical lesson for us that I think helps to kind of undergird what I think happened this week. And so he mentioned this synergy that he and I have. Ben Henson and I, the only thing that we share in common is we're both male, okay? And neither one of us are having gender dysphoria. So we share that in common.
You both lack a little hair.
And we both lack a little hair. And we both know Linda. Ben's known her longer than I have. Since they went to high school together. But Ben is he's a genius IQ, tested multiple times at the University of Idaho. They gave him a free ride at the University of Idaho if he would allow them to test his IQ over a period of, multiple times while he was there. So he was like, yeah, I'm fine with that, I'll take the test. He would go to his classes, and before classes started, a month before, he would usually take between 18 and 21 hours, and he would read all of his textbooks before the first day of class. And then he would go into class, and of course he remembered everything he read, and it meant that he was smarter than the professor who was teaching the course. And so that made him a problem student for some of these professors. And I thought, well, that's not how I went to college, so I definitely do not have a genius, I'm not a genius IQ. But he's the technician. And I mean, the guy can figure out anything. He's a phenomenal researcher. He just has vast experience. He didn't even get a bachelor's degree. He just left school. But he's connected to all these people at A&M and Washington State University in the agriculture departments. He's connected to all these PhDs who run these major departments, and they all know him, and they all knew his dad. And his dad was head of the veterinary department at Washington State University. And so, anyway, very well connected, but he's the technician. He can figure out anything. It's phenomenal how much Ben Henson knows about agriculture and about a lot of other things. And so, I'm thinking, I don't see my role. Like, I don't know why you need me there. I add 0 to agriculture since I don't really know anything about it. And he said, John, he said, I do have this genius IQ about agriculture applied there, but he said, you have an intuitive perspective on everything that happens. You look at it completely differently than I do, through another lens altogether. And what you do, I can't do at all. And he said, I think that's why we team up so well together. And you get the people, you get the cultural situation, and then you look at the farming and everything through a completely different lens. And he said, I think you're the genius in that regard. And so he was texting me this morning, and because we're off so long, I go to bed and I get up and there's 4 or 5 texts waiting, and then I respond to those. And he was talking about soil additives, right? SOIL, soil additives. But when he typed it in, it got typed in soul additives.
Oh, yeah.
And then he corrected it, soil. And I said, well, it's not so bad if we have some soul additives in our work as well. So I've now realized that Ben deals with soil additives and Whitty deals with soul additives. And so there's this synergy, and that's a part of what has happened, and it's happened both times that I've gone, is Ben and I have really worked well together as a team. Then a second thing that I think we're excited about is that we're making ourselves accessible to the poorest of the poor in Rwanda. Now, Rwanda is not the poorest place Linda and I worked. Linda and I worked in southern Sudan, we worked in northern Uganda, and the Karamojong, without a doubt, are the poorest people that we've ever worked among. I walked about 1,200 miles among the Karamojong over 2 years, doing my soul additive work. And in 2 years of walking, I was offered food twice in 2 years. If I had been in Kenya, I'd have been offered food twice a day, every day we walked, or tea or something. And the Karamojong were just the poorest, hungriest people we've ever been around. And so the Rwandans are not nearly as poor as the Karamojong were, but we're still working with the poorest of them. And so one of the things that we're doing is we're making ourselves accessible to them. What I've learned about farmers, anyway, there is, it's not that they aren't hardworking, it's not that they aren't capable, it's that they don't have access to the most basic things. So like, for instance, Ben figured out in a few hours that you can kill millipedes with boric acid. Well, boric acid is what you make soap with, right? And a bunch of other things, basic additive to a lot of things. And he went back and found that from articles in the 1970s that were written. Well, there's no boric acid in the country of Rwanda. Can you imagine that? Something as basic as that, it's not in the country. And so what happens to these farmers in these poor places is they simply don't have access to anything. They don't have access to information. They don't have access to...
Do they have satellite internet?
Everybody has a phone. Oddly enough, I mean, and that wasn't the case whenever Linda and I were there, 17 years ago. Nobody had a phone. Now everybody has a phone. So they don't have satellite internet. It is there, you could get it there, but of course they don't have it. But they don't know what to look up. They just don't know how to do research like that, lack of exposure.
But you could research.
Oh yeah, and Ben's doing that, of course. And so one of the things that I think that we did, and we've done it on every trip, but we did it, and it is what Jesus did, and it's what I want us to look at briefly this morning, because I think there's an application for us, and then I'll go on and tell you more of what we're thinking to actually do in Rwanda. But I want us to pause at this point and think about people who don't have access. Imagine if you didn't have access to the most basic things that you needed in life, what your life would be like. And so almost none of them have electricity, of course, don't have access to a lot of basic foods, don't have access much to education. There's some, but not a lot. And so just imagine yourself in that situation. And I want us to look at a couple passages, one out of Mark chapter 1. So if you have a Bible, I want you to open it to Mark 1:21. And I want us to see how Jesus gave access to people. So Mark 1:21, and we'll go all the way through 2:12. But I'm going to walk us through this very quickly, and then just point out a couple things as we go. So Mark 1:21 says, "And they went into Capernaum, and immediately on the Sabbath he entered the synagogue and was teaching. And they were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one who had authority and not as the scribes." So the scribes would quote one another, right? Kind of like you do in those papers you had to write in college. Remember when you had to add footnotes and all that? Because you didn't know anything working on your BA, so you had to quote somebody who knew more than you to show that what you were saying was authoritative. Jesus didn't quote anyone, to put it that way. He wrote a paper without footnotes, and the people said he taught them as one who had authority and not as the scribes. And immediately there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Now it's very interesting that a few chapters later, when Jesus crosses over the Sea of Galilee, and Capernaum is right on the Sea of Galilee, when he crosses over to the area called the Decapolis, and Decapolis simply means Deca, Polis, 10 cities. And this was an area where Gentiles lived, and they kept pigs, remember? And that's where he cast the demons out of this man, and they went into the pigs, and the pigs ran over the cliff and drowned in the ocean sea. You remember that? Mm-hmm. That the demon inside the man at the Decapolis said the very same thing as this unclean spirit said to Jesus. "We know who you are. Have you come here to destroy us?" Well, of course, nobody else knew who he was. And one of the questions that you have to ask is, how did these unclean spirits know who Jesus was? And why did they think that he could destroy them? We'll answer that another day. It's a wonderful lesson. But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying out with a loud voice, came out of him. And they were all amazed. That's all the people in the synagogue. All amazed, so that they questioned among themselves, saying, "What is this? A new teaching with authority?" He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him. And at once his fame spread everywhere throughout all the surrounding region of Galilee. Now, 28 it's just an editorial comment, But y'all, one of the things that happens when you go to places like a Rwanda and you go to an Ngoma district that is the poorest and they're kind of forgotten and there's nobody there, when you show up, you're the only game in town. I mean, you can't imagine how boring life is in a place like that. And then you come in and you teach about maize production and somebody does it and their field looks 10 times better than anybody else's field. You cannot keep that a secret in a place like this. And in a sense, your fame spread. It's not our fame personally. It's just everybody knows about it instantly. And so when any good thing or any bad thing happens in a culture like that, it's like it doesn't get missed. You know, they're not inundated with all the things that you and I are inundated with. It's hard for anyone to get our attention. It's not hard to get attention in a place like that. Anyway, Jesus got a ton of attention immediately. So then verse 29, and immediately he left the synagogue and entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. So Simon lived in Capernaum. That's where he and Andrew lived. And so he enters into Simon's house, and Simon's mother-in-law was ill with a fever, and immediately they told him about her. And so they've come home from synagogue on a Saturday, and lunch was supposed to be ready, but guess what? The cook was sick, right? So they told him about her, and in verse 31, he came and took her by the hand and lifted her up, and the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening at sundown, they, being the people of Capernaum, brought to him all who were sick or oppressed by demons. Told you he was the only game in town. And the whole city was gathered together at the door of Simon's house. So get that picture in your mind. And he healed many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons, and he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. By the way, Jesus had the gift of healing. All right? And here's what the gift of healing means. It means you can heal anyone. If you have the gift of healing, you can heal anyone at any time, all the time.
Whether they believe in you or not.
That's right. Because you have the gift. And so, obviously, since he's the creator, he's the healer, right? And in that sense, you wouldn't say he was gifted as you and I would have been, but he could heal everybody. Okay, and rising very early, verse 35, in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went to a desolate place, and there he prayed. So Jesus had a quiet time, right? And apparently this was his routine. And Simon and those who were with him searched for him, and they found him and said to him, "Everyone is looking for you." Okay? So if everybody's looking for you, and you're Jesus, what are you going to do? Well, let's set up shop. That's what Simon's thinking. My gosh, we don't have to go anywhere. Everybody's coming to us. And verse 38, he said to them, "Let us go on to the next towns, that I may preach there also, for that is why I came." And some translations say, "For this purpose I have come." And so he came, it says in verse 39, and he went throughout all Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and casting out demons. So this first point we see it, but we're going to see this repeated over and over again. Jesus was very clear about his purpose. He knew what his purpose on the earth was. He was crystal clear about it. I think he knew it probably from the time that he was 13. He had his bar mitzvah, and his mom was so mad, remember, because they were lost for 3 days. "Son, why have you done this?" And he says, "Don't you know that I had to be about my Father's business?" I think Jesus, from the age of 13, knew what his mission was on the earth, but he didn't start his ministry for 17 years, which is one of the most incredible little stories about Jesus that we just pass over, is how he could take 17 years and submit himself to Mary and Joseph, even though by 13 he already knew his purpose. And now again, he's stating his purpose. And so it would have just been very obvious to set up shop in Capernaum. He wouldn't have had to travel. Everybody would have come to him. His fame is spreading throughout the whole region. He could have just lived there, but instead he goes on the road and he goes to all the other villages, and he does the same thing in those villages that he's just done in Capernaum, because that was his purpose in life. All right, verse 40. And a leper came to him, imploring him, and kneeling, said to him, if you will, you can make me clean. Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand and touched him, and said to him, I will be clean. And immediately the leprosy left him, and he was made clean. Okay, we need to pause there. Because no rabbi would ever touch a leper. In fact, some rabbis bragged about the fact that they carried hard-boiled eggs in their coat, and if a leper came close to them, they would throw those eggs at them to keep them a distance from them, because a leper was unclean, and if any of them touched him or got too close to him, they would become ceremonially unclean and wouldn't be able to carry out their duties, their religious duties. What does Jesus do? Touches them.
Touch.
Okay, let that sink in. Now, was Jesus on a ministry going looking for lepers? No. The leper was looking for him. But when the leper found him, what did Jesus do? He made himself accessible to him, and he touched him. When he got to Peter's house, what did he do? My mother-in-law is sick, and he healed her. That evening, what did they do? They brought all their people to Jesus who were sick and demon-possessed. He didn't go looking for them. They came looking for him, and he healed them. And then he interacts this way with this leper. And immediately the leprosy left him. He was made clean. And Jesus sternly charged him and sent him away at once and said to him, see that you say nothing to anyone. Right. Right. Oh yeah, Jesus, I won't tell anyone. Right? I mean, you and I say that all the time. Oh, you can trust me. I won't tell a soul. Yeah, right.
Do you think that was reverse psychology on Jesus' part?
He's trying to keep him from talking because why? His fame is spreading and he doesn't want to be famous. It's not time yet because he knows what they're going to do. Rodney, they're going to try to make him the king. And he knows he's going to the cross and it's not time. And so that's what he's doing. And he said to him, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded for a proof to them. 45, but he went out and began to talk freely about it. I have leprosy, and you know all the lepers are shunned, and Jesus, I said, you can heal me, and he touched me, and he healed me instantly. I mean, unbelievable. Look what it says. Mm-hmm. He talked freely and about it and to spread the news so that Jesus could no longer openly enter a town. Before he would get to town, everyone was out in desolate places and people were coming to him from every quarter. And this is where I conclude that Jesus was like a rock star. He couldn't even go into a village. The village would meet him while they were still out in the middle of nowhere, on foot, coming to him like that. All right, so then he returns to Capernaum after some days, and it was reported that he was home, and they were staying in Peter's house. And it says in verse 2 that many were gathered together so that there was no more room, not even at the door. And he was preaching the word to them. So the house was totally packed, right? Totally packed out. And he's preaching to them. And verse 3, and they came bringing to him a paralytic carried by 4 men. And when they could not get near to him because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him. And when they had made an opening, they let down a bed. The bed on which the paralytic lay. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, son, your sins are forgiven. Now some of the scribes were sitting there. So the religious guys were inside Peter's house. This all happened at Peter's house. They were inside Peter's house. They had a front row seat to Jesus. And remember, the scribes are paying very close attention to him because they want to know everything he's saying. Because if they can, they want to catch him at something he says. And discredit him. And later, they even got so angry at him, they wanted to kill him for it. And so they heard Jesus, they had a front row seat, and he said, son, your sins are forgiven. Now, some of the scribes were sitting there questioning in their hearts, why does this man speak like that? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone? Are they right?
Well, unless you're Jesus.
Yeah. So they don't know who he is. But they are right. Only God can forgive sin. And immediately Jesus, perceiving in his spirit that they thus questioned within themselves, said to them. So they didn't say this out loud. Hey, what you doing? They didn't say it out loud. They just said it to themselves. And then Jesus does what? He reads their mind. Who can read minds but God alone? Now they could have asked that question, but they didn't ask that one. Well, he's omniscient. He knows what they're thinking. And so he asked them, why do you question these things in your hearts? Which is easier to say to the paralytic, let me prove it to you. Your sins are forgiven. Easier for me to say that or to say, rise, take up your bed and walk. But that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins, he said to the paralytic, I say to you, rise, pick up your bed, and go home. And he rose and immediately picked up his bed and went out before them, so that they were all amazed and glorified God, saying, we've never seen anything like this. By the way, he called himself the Son of Man. Look at Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel. Chapter 7. Verse 13. So Jesus had just called himself Son of Man. And remember, all the scribes knew all this Old Testament. They had it memorized. So they knew when he called himself Son of Man, they instantly know this passage. Daniel says, I saw in the night visions, and behold, the clouds of heaven. There came one like a son of man. And he came to the Ancient of Days. That would be God, Jehovah, God. And he was presented before him, and to him was given dominion. So that's the Son of Man. To him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. Now, when is that kingdom going to be established?
1,000-year reign.
1,000-year reign. And what's going to happen when Jesus reigns from Jerusalem on his throne? All peoples, nations, and languages will come to him, and they will serve him. Because he'll come not as a suffering servant, he'll come as the reigning Lord with a rod of iron. All the scribes knew when Jesus called himself the Son of Man, here's the picture that comes into their mind. You're saying you're him? And Jesus saying, I'm saying I'm him, and I'm about to prove it to you. Rise up and walk. And this paralytic, who had never walked a day in his life, and they all knew him, gets up and walks out. So they're in the presence of God. But they don't give him glory. The people do, but they don't. Now that's who we're dealing with. That's who Jesus is. Now let's go to Luke 7. In Luke 7, after he had finished his sayings in the hearing of the people, and that's the Sermon on the Mount, he entered Capernaum. So he's back to Capernaum again. Now a centurion had a servant who was sick and at the point of death, who was highly valued by him. And remember, the centurion's a Roman, right? So he's a Gentile, and he's a part of the occupying force. So the Jews hate these Romans, and they typically hate these centurions. But that's not the case here. When the centurion heard about Jesus, he sent to him elders of the Jews, asking him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they pleaded with him earnestly, saying about the centurion, he's worthy to have you do this for him, for he loves our nation, and he is the one who built us our synagogue. So the synagogue that Jesus had cast the demon out, that we read about earlier, was built by a Roman centurion. He's the one who gave the money to work to do it. And Jesus went with them. So I want you to notice that he went with them. Okay? So do you think this was a plan? Hey, Jesus, we're going to come by, just let you know we're on our way, and we'll be there, maybe tomorrow about noon, and maybe you could come to the centurion's house. There's nothing like that happening, is it? It's just all of a sudden, here's this group of Jewish elders. Hey, there's this Roman centurion, his servant is sick. We really want you to come heal him. And what does Jesus do? He goes.
Yeah.
He makes himself accessible. The Son of Man makes himself accessible. That's not usually what almighty, all-powerful people do. But it's what Jesus did, and he did it again and again and again throughout his whole ministry. He made himself accessible. So he went with them. When he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends, saying to him, Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. Therefore, I did not presume to come to you, but say the word, and let my servant be healed. For I too am a man set under authority, with soldiers under me, and I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes. To my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard these things, he marveled. Okay, can you imagine what it takes for the Son of Man to marvel? He marveled at him. Remember, this guy's a Gentile. He marveled at him, and turning to the crowd that followed him, said, I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith. Now, why would he make that statement? Why would he expect more faith in Israel than from a Roman Gentile centurion?
Israel is God's people.
They got the Old Testament, thousands of years of history. And he says, I haven't found such faith in all of Israel. And when those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the servant well. I don't even know if Jesus said, be well. It doesn't look like he said it. If he did, they didn't record it. He just heals the guy from a distance.
Yeah, but he changed the centurion's life.
Oh man, did it ever. But the centurion already believed in him, didn't he? So what he marveled at was his great faith. Just remember, what does it take? Triumphant trio? Faith that works, love that labors,
Hope.
and hope that endures. And so this guy had faith. What I want us to see is how Jesus was willing to make himself accessible. Okay, we're not quite done.
Yeah.
So, one more story. So, the servant's well, and then Mark goes on in verse 11. Luke goes on in verse 11. He says, soon afterward, he went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a great crowd went with him. Oh, of course they did. I mean, they're going with him everywhere. And he drew near to the gate of the town, and behold, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a considerable crowd from the town was with her. Now, that says volumes that we could easily read over. This lady's a widow, which means you married in those days for a man to take care of you, right? It's not like it is now. She needed someone to take care of her. He had paid a dowry for her. She was owned by him and was his wife, but now he has died, making her a widow, and so who's going to support her in her old age? Her son. And now he's dead, and she doesn't have another one. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said to her, do not weep. Kind of reminds me of that lady I saw. I planted my sorghum twice, and it hadn't come up. Unfortunately, I'm not the son of man, and I don't have the gift of agriculture, and I can't make her sorghum come up. But I can have compassion. He said, do not weep. Then he came up and touched the bier or the casket, and the bear stood still, and he said, young man, I say to you, arise. Put yourself
Shocking.
Shocking. And the dead man sat up and began to speak.
Probably cleared the room.
And Jesus gave him to his mother. Okay, look what happened. Fear seized them all. I guess it did. And they glorified God, saying, a great prophet has arisen among us, and God has visited his people. And this report about him spread through the whole of Judea and all the surrounding country. Now, Capernaum is in Galilee. And then it's Samaria, and then it's Judea. So this event went all the way to the southern tip of the country. That means it's in Jerusalem now. That means everybody's talking about what Jesus did up in Capernaum. You think Jesus had planned, oh, I'm going to go to Nain, I'm going to heal this. No. He just went to Nain. And when he got there, here's what he found, and he acted. And he was accessible. Now here's the point I want to make for us. I don't know if you think by now, but I'm thinking by now, that the purpose of our life, broadly speaking, is to save our soul. Is to make the most of our time on the earth. Jesus' purpose was to come and to die for the sins of the world, to preach the gospel of the kingdom to the Jews, and then to die for the sins of the world. And he was not going to be dissuaded from that grand purpose. And he knew it from the time he was 13. So when he got up every day, he knew why he was getting up. And by now, you and I need to know that too about ourselves. We don't need to wonder why we're getting up every day. That needs to be crystal clear in our mind if we're going to save our soul. But how we're going to conduct ourselves on this day, we don't always know. Because sometimes we're going to encounter people that need you and me to be something to them that we didn't know we were going to need to be to them that day. Now, I don't think I'm going to pull off what Jesus pulled off. But here's what I do know. That if you and I will make ourselves accessible to people, and if we'll adjust our schedules, whenever people come along in our lives day to day, and we have unique opportunities, we can add something to their soul. We can be soul additive agents. So one day we were at the farm, and you know, we're white, and so we naturally attract attention. You can't help it. Anyway, this group of girls comes along, and some of them are probably about 14 or 15, and some of them are like maybe 8. But there's about 6 girls coming along, and they all stop because I'm standing there, and Ben's standing there, and they know Ben. I don't think they know me, but here's another Mzungu. And then there were sort of like 4 in our group. And so they stopped and greeted us, and so I was greeting them, and so I don't know why. I asked them. They were doing something that caused me to ask this question. I'm sorry, I can't remember that part of the story. And I said, oh, how do you girls cook your beans? Odd question. And so they said, well, we boil them. I said, no. I want to know step by step how you cook your beans. And so they started telling me, well, we boil the beans, and then in a separate pot, we put oil, and then we start frying onions. And then after the onions are fried for a while, then we cut up tomatoes, and we put tomatoes in there, and then we add salt and pepper, and then we put the beans in that pot. Well, that's exactly right. I know exactly how Africans cook beans, because Africans taught me how to cook beans. I never knew. I always messed it up. I would cook that in the pot, that's called the mchuzi, okay? So it's your tomatoes, and your onions first, and then your tomatoes, and you cook your tomatoes till they're all the way cooked down. It's like you can't even recognize a whole tomato in there, but you can see it's red. You cook all that, you add your salt and pepper, and then of course, I add meat to mine, which they don't add to theirs. I add meat to mine. But what you cannot do is once you pour that mchuzi in your pot, you cannot add more water. Because if you do, it'll ruin the taste of the beans. And so you have to boil them down to exactly the amount of water that you want in them before you do that. So I told the girls, I said, well, here's how I cook beans. And so now they're listening, this Mzungu cooks beans? Yeah. And I cook beans just like they do, only I said, but I add meat to mine. When I said that, everybody laughed, of course. And then I said, instead of pouring the beans into the mchuzi, I poured the mchuzi into the pot of beans. And then I said, one day Jesus was talking to a woman. And I told the story of Jesus meeting the woman of Samaria at the well, offering her water to drink. Remember, the disciples had gone into town and they had come back to buy food. And when they got back, they said, here, Jesus, eat. You know, we walked a long way today, all the way from down south in Judea. They walked 30-something miles that day. And they said, eat. And he says, I have food to eat that you know not of. And they're all looking at each other like, did somebody give him something to eat, you know, while we were gone? And he said, my food is to do the will of my Father who sent me. And I told the girls, I said, y'all, our beans are good, but Jesus said he has food to eat that we don't even know about. And that will make you strong for eternity. And so there was a soul additive moment. I don't know what they're going to do with it. Maybe they won't do anything with it. But it seemed appropriate at the moment to talk about cooking beans and to talk about Jesus as the bread of life. And so, on a day-to-day schedule, you and I don't know all, we have plans. I know Tom, I know Tom has plans every day, like he's got all this list of things he's gonna do and places he's building. You know, a lot of you have that. I mean, young business, Paul's got plans, and you know, Harley's gonna go back up to Wyoming, he's got plans, but you never know who's gonna come into your life. And these are things that I got to experience. It was a part of the Rwandan surprise. Okay, I'm white here in Junction, nobody's gonna stop me on the side of the road and say, Woody, tell me a Bible story. And they're not gonna listen if I did. Hey, can I tell you a Bible story? No, I got something to do. Are you crazy? That guy's weird. That's what they're gonna say about me here, but not in Rwanda.
Not your Sunday school class either.
Yeah. So anyway, Ben and I have something unique to offer. We have a lot of years of experience, but we also have made ourselves accessible to the poorest people of Rwanda.
See you heading back.
Still doesn't like to travel though.
I was gonna say, you didn't wanna go, it was pulling.
Yeah.
Do I have time for a real quick story, John?
Yes.
I think we'll add to it. Just this week, I saw an interview with Merle Haggard in his later years.
Mm.
And whoever was interviewing asked him, said, is there anything that really stands out in your life that touched you?
Yeah.
And he said, yes, there is. He said, when I walked out of San Quentin, it was on a Thursday, and I expected someone to be there to pick me up. And he said, they weren't there. He said, this lady looked around and said, could I give you a ride? And he said, well, yes, ma'am, I do need a ride. And he said, he got in the car and he asked her, he said, why are you doing this? She said, I'm a wealthy lady. She said, every Thursday I come and look for someone who needs a ride.
Wow.
My husband would not approve of this. My son would not approve of this. But I have never felt threatened. And that was the story that Merle Haggard remembered and conveyed.
Yeah.
To me, that's exactly along the lines you're talking about.
It is. I mean, she's just making herself accessible.
A real quick story is the fact that, you got an email, and I guess others did also, that, showed a picture of a young man and his wife that are now working at Mighty Oaks this week. And he had been there when?
Last summer.
Last summer, being one of those people that had really turned his life around, actually saved his life. He's there. I'm anxious to meet him with his wife working there. I mean, that's how they grow people that teach there, but it's right there in our backyard, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I would like to know how you worked on the floor with her, Leonard.
Well, it's sort of the same thing. I just going to Billings my mission was to take care of my baby, my grandbaby. And then on the plane, they announced, is there anyone medical that could be willing to assist? And so I went and talked to the girl, and she quickly became unconscious. I got her in the back, in the galley area, got her laying down, trying to figure out what was going on, and then she had 10 seizures within 30 minutes. And it was an amazing team. I had an L&D nurse that said, I'm just an L&D nurse, I don't know why I'm here. I had another girl said, I'm an EMT, how can I help? And so I was able to put her at the head and like that. The pilot said, we're about to land, we were 30 minutes out, should we divert? And I said, no, Billings is the closest place for help. And so then the pilot said, I want her sitting in a seat. I said, can't, she's unconscious. Then he sent word, we want you all to be sitting in the seat. I said, no, can't. We're having to protect an airway. And she was actively seizing as we were landing. We were having to keep her from hitting the seat.
And swallowing her tongue.
Yeah,
That would be
yeah,
the most dangerous.
airway is the
Yeah.
main thing, yeah.
How is that lady?
I don't know,
You know.
I wish I did.
But they gave, the doctor for American Airlines sent Linda an email and gave her 25,000 bonus points.
And it was a very personable letter.
Very
It was
personal letter,
amazing,
yeah,
like,
it
we
was
know
so
you're not
cool.
doing this for money.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
So what we're gonna do, I know, I'm really, but God, the best story I haven't told you. So I got surprised. I didn't wanna go to Rwanda, I made that pretty clear to everybody. I'm old and I like my routine, but, you know, I really felt like the Holy Spirit kept telling me to go. And Molly even tried to give up me an out. Maybe he's telling me to stay. I said, no, Molly, I think he's telling me to go. And so we got surprised over and over again. And so on this trip, I left my suitcase there in Reno.
Oh.
And so I've decided that for the next foreseeable number of years, until I guess I'm too old to do this kind of thing, I'm gonna spend 6.5 months in Junction. I'm gonna spend 4.5 months in Oregon, and I'm gonna spend a month in Rwanda. And I wanna remind you that I didn't ask you to teach this, if I could teach this class.
We ask you.
You asked me. I'm glad you did. I didn't ask Ben if I could buy the property in Oregon. In fact, Linda and I tried to buy 3 properties in Oregon, and it never happened. Paid full price. We couldn't get it done. So we just gave up. We said, well, we're not ever gonna own a property in Oregon. And summer before last, Ben approached us and said, would you like to buy my dad's place? And he sold it to us for 60 cents on the dollar. And then I didn't wanna go to Rwanda. And so I didn't go looking for any of these things. They came looking for me. And I think that's part of what the Spirit of God does for us. It's like Jesus. He didn't, not that I'm him, but in the same way, he's not looking for these events. They came looking for him, but he didn't shirk them. And so I just wrote here, my goal in life is to save my soul, and everything is filtered through that. I have to try to do that. And y'all, I'm not perfect at it. I'm just like you. I struggle with corruption because I'm not suffering. And the struggle's real. But exactly how that works out is not only determined by me, but it gets determined by other people. And that's when the Spirit of God surprises. I gotta tell you one last story. So on Tuesday this last week, Monday, we went over to meet with a whole group of farmers that we worked with last time. And they said, first we want you to stop at Mama Shadia's place. She's a new farmer and she has the best maize of anybody in Mama. Mama Shadia walked up, and I'm telling you, it was like God walked in the room. this woman, and you've never heard me say this woman was so full of the Holy Spirit. You could see it in her eyes, in her smile. And I don't know if you've experienced it before, but when you get in the presence of God, one of the things it does to you is it makes you emotional. That doesn't mean every time you cry, you're in the presence of God. Mama Shadia finds children in town near where she lives that doesn't have anybody to care for them. And she doesn't adopt them, but she feeds them. And the reason she planted this maze is to feed these kids. That's what it grew. Oh my God. And I couldn't help myself. Tears began to stream down my cheek. And partly because of the story. That didn't actually grip me. What gripped me is I realized this lady, and the way I said it to her, I said, I see the joy of the Lord in your eyes. I don't ever use the phrase joy of the Lord. I don't ever use it. But that's the only phrase to describe this woman. And so before we left, I shook her hand, but then I wouldn't let it go. And I prayed for her. And I just prayed about 10 different things for Mama Shadia. And again, as we left, Ben said, well, that made the day worth it. Yeah, it didn't matter what else happened the rest of the day. It was worth it because we met Mama Shadia. Surprised by the Spirit. You never know. And I think that's what this whole thing, going to Rwanda, I'm shocked that I left my suitcase. I don't know what else to say about it. I think yeah.
John, are there many men over there that do agriculture?
Yeah.
Everybody we're talking about is
No, there's men too. Celestine is a man. And yeah, there's many men who are farmers. But of course, a lot of it does fall to women. I mean, it's just, it happens that way. Anyway, there's ways for you to be involved if you want to be.
and then send those chemicals over there?
Yeah, I mean, so to speak. Yeah, I think we can get boric acid. We can get boric acid out of Kenya. So we're gonna get it out of Kenya. We'll go to Iron right. And that's an immediate thing. If you want to be involved, there's ways to do that. I'm not asking you to be, but if you want to be, there's opportunity. Linda and I are gonna invest. We're gonna invest in the for-profit side of it, probably as against the nonprofit. But anyway, that's what we're gonna do for a while. So. That's what happened in Rwanda and Linda's spring trip.
Thank you.